group. Brian, are you there? Yeah. Everything just kind of froze for a second. James, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so let's just start all over. Hello, everybody. And this is Donya Williams, and we're here today with our guest, um, James Morgan. He wrote the book, The Lost Empire. We're going to talk to him about the Black Freemasons in the Old West. So thank you for joining us, James.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm sure we're thankful Brian's here too.
Yeah, yeah. For whatever reason, you guys, Brian is kind of frozen, and we don't know why, but you can hear him, so everything should be good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, everybody was telling me there's no sound and everything. So let's just get into those people right now. And we got Toy Wright Anders, which is our cousin, Brian and I cousin. She says, "I'm here, cousins." And then we have good afternoon from Denise and Martha Marshall, another family member from South Carolina. And then yes, oh yes, oh yeah. Well, LaMonica's. This is actually a post that was left right on this particular thing. So I don't think that that's her unless she just got on. They said your audio is garbled, Brian. Denicia said that. Okay, but anyway, let's just get right to it. So, what we're going to discuss today, I know you guys have had some times where you've come across Freemasons, whether it be Black Freemasons or white Freemasons. Well, James, in my opinion, is an expert in researching them. And he wrote this wonderful book about a man named Captain William Matthews, Captain William Matthews. And we wanted to share it. We want you guys to know about it and really get involved. And hopefully, we'll post the link up, of course, to purchase it as well. So I want to start with, just James, tell us how you got into researching as a whole.
As a whole, that's a good question. I don't think I ever really stopped. Just being in school and whatnot. I've always been into history and everything like that. From a pretty young age. I often tell people that when I was born, when I was a child, everybody in my family was older than me. I'm my parents' firstborn child, and so when I was a kid, like there was nobody to play with that was my age. So I just kind of had to like grow up fast, and I was very aware that there was a world before me. I was very close to my grandparents and whatnot. So my great grandfather's still living. So I've always wanted to learn about that world that came before me and how I got here and what my role was in this larger story of not just my family but just the world as a whole. More specifically, to the book and the topic of today's discussion, I became a Mason in 2010 here in Washington, D.C. I've served as the leader of my lodge. The proper phrase is the worshipful master. So I did that for 2015 and 2016, which was a real big honor. I'm now the grand historian for the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, and which is again an honor and a privilege to serve in that position. And one of the reasons why it became fascinating to me as a topic is because when I first got a curiosity about the fraternity, I was very curious about Masonry. Sometimes people see these shows on the History Channel or what have you, and that's all well and good. People see these conspiracy theory type of films and whatnot, but I became exposed, pretty early, honestly, to the fact that there were Caucasian Masons and there were African American Masons, just like everything else in our society, right?
Right.
So in terms of in learning the history of Black Masonry and whatnot and how far back it went, I said, wow, there's a whole knowledge base here that really isn't discussed a lot. Having come out of a rites of passage program myself when I was a teenager, I saw similarities in the organization to what I had already been a part of, and I said, "Wow, this is a type of organization and a tradition that helped men mark manhood and that transition from boyhood to manhood." And I really wanted to learn more about it, and so I signed up and just kind of dived right in, uh, and started seeing dots that needed to be connected, and I just started contributing to that conversation over the past almost 10 years now. So
wow.
Okay. In the 1770s, is the early. Yes, yes. The traditional history, to give everybody an understanding of. First of all, let's go back. What is Freemasonry? Who are we? We are the world's oldest and largest gentlemen's fraternity. Uh, our history is founded in myth and legend, and I can get into all that, but I'll save you all the trouble. As far to bring it up to the more modern day. In the right around 1717, 1720, there's some debates about that now. What we call Grand Lodge Freemasonry was established, meaning the formal organization as we kind of know it today. It moves into the British colonies, here in what we now call the United States. And in the 1770s, again, our traditional history is 1775. There's some more recent research that is kind of pulling that date into debate now, and some are saying 1778. Regardless, but we know that a man by the name of Prince Hall and several other men of African descent were made Masons in sometime in the 1770s. And what ends up happening is that they eventually petitioned the Grand Lodge of England for a charter, which was granted to them in 1784 to establish African Lodge number 459. That charter was actually physically received by them in 1787. And from there, basically the Black Masonic movement spread from Boston to, oh man, I'm sorry, hold on one second, my phone was ringing. This brother from my lodge calling me now. The movement basically spread from Boston to Philadelphia, to New York, to Connecticut, to all over the place, pretty rapidly, given the times. And that was the thing that I thought was most fascinating about this. This is an organization of Black men during the peak of the transatlantic slave trade to the United States. And they're organizing, they're having lectures, they're dispensing charity to sick and distressed brothers, and they're also organizing institutions for Masonic as well as non-Masonic institutions. And so the fact that there was this history there and it was so well documented, again, was something I just found kind of fascinating.
Wow. Brian, I'm getting messages stating that they can't hear you. Can you log off and come back in? Okay. So while Brian is logging off, what I would like to ask you is, okay, yes, you're right. There is this huge mystery about Masonry and everything. I can honestly say that my son my oldest son has always been very intrigued behind it. And I used to always tell him, I said, your curiosity is actually going to make you join it. But he swears up and down, you guys are trying to rule the world. And I mean, he got this whole, he has this whole thing that goes on when it comes to that. But
I am trying to rule the world, but first I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay my rent next month.
How about that? So the other thing, though, I think that you said that it started back as early as in the 1700s.
Yes.
When did Captain Matthews join?
Okay, so to bring it forward, what happens is that you have the spread of Black Freemasonry from the 1770s all the way through the 1800s. Now, to bring it up to the period of the book, William Matthews was born in 1828, and he actually becomes a Mason in the 1850s. But there's some backstory with him to kind of contextualize it. So Captain Matthews was born on the eastern shore of Maryland, and when he hit about age 19 or 20, he went to Jamaica for a couple years. He comes back to the States, and he ends up purchasing a shipping vessel. He becomes a grain merchant going up and down the East Coast. And in the mid 1850s, he joins a lodge in Boston, Massachusetts, which is of course important because Boston is the home of Black Freemasonry, where we kind of started here in the United States. And so that's where he joined in the 1850s and kind of moves on from there.
Wow, that's where Brian lives now, in Boston. Brian, can you hear us? Because you still frozen.
I can hear you.
Okay, can you guys hear Brian? Because as long as you can hear him, that's fine. For whatever reason, he's freezing. So
the computer can only take but so many good-looking guys at one time. That's all it is.
I guess that's what it is. Yeah, I am somewhat surrounded by handsome men, aren't I, right now? That's awesome. Go, Donya. So, what's the difference between the Masonry for African Americans and the Masonry for white Americans?
Really, there is none. It's the history. Again, like everything else in America, we were segregated against. So, I mean, the not to get too deep into stuff I can't talk about, but it's the same organization. Really, it's just again, Prince Hall was initiated along with other brothers. They became Masons. They got a charter, which actually is probably, in my estimation, is one of the most historic and sacred documents in African American history. We still have it. It still exists. They had authority to establish a lodge, but when the white Masons of Massachusetts decided to form their own Grand Lodge, separating from the English, all the lodges in Massachusetts, kind of got together, but for some strange reason, African Lodge was not invited to the party. And so over time, because of neglect from the white Masons here in America, and then there were some issues administratively between us and the British. Over time, we became our own separate, entity. I mean, we're still linked. We're still a part of the same organization. And today, we're all what we call recognized and whatnot today. But that was a long, long struggle of several generations of people to kind of get that mended, if you will. But yeah.
So that actually raises a really interesting question. So say, we're still in the slavery era. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to create a Black Freemason chapter, what would I have to go through to make that happen?
Essentially, not to give away too much, but essentially you'd have to join a lodge and get a number of gentlemen of brothers who are in your area who want to start a lodge up. They have to get to actually request a permission or a charter from a Grand Lodge, and again, that's an important process right there because all these things create records, which is something I found fascinating because, I mean, a lot of, like my Grand Lodge, where I'm the Grand Historian today, our first lodge was established in 1825 here in D.C.
In D.C. Wow.
So think about it. You got free Black men organizing. And mind you, DC was, we're below the Mason-Dixon line now, right? So they're organizing a lodge. In 1848, we organized our Grand Lodge here in DC. This is pre-Civil War, and for someone like myself who was very into history, to be able to kind of track those documents and those movements of people was very fascinating thing to be able to do. And as I also have a very, very, very high addiction to genealogy, I said, wait a second, these things, you got somebody has to link these things together, and I wasn't really seeing anybody kind of do that in a way that I saw that was methodical,
right.
And it's because a lot of people didn't have the access that I did, and so, I mean, of course, being a Mason, I wear my ring every day. I have people come up to me all the time and they say, hey, my grandfather was the Grand Master, he was a 33rd degree, and he was this and he was that. And I was like, your grandfather probably wasn't a Grand Master, but he probably was something. Let's go and look and let me show you, but again, a lot of people just didn't have the type of access that I have, and so I kind of felt it a duty personally to myself as well as to the organization to kind of help tell our story, particularly for the historical community, because I find a lot of times people kind of skip over or they dismiss not just Masonry but Black fraternal organizations as a whole.
As a whole, yes, they do.
But it's a very important aspect of history because again, these organizations leave records, and it's not just about your Frederick Douglasses and your Martin Delaney's and your, the big names. It's about your grandfather.
That's right.
Yeah, it's, and as genealogists, that's something I know that people are always looking for. What's the next piece of paper that's got my grandfather or my grandmother on there?
Right.
So, yeah.
So respect, because I being a part of an organization myself, I respect the fact that I hear you saying, I don't want to give this away or I don't want to give that away. So we're going to try to lean away from those types of questions and let's go into the how to research those who are in Masonry, and then afterwards we can go deeper into your book. Sure. and what Captain Matthews did. So with that being said, you helped me, and according to LaMonica, you actually helped her as well.
Hi, LaMonica.
Well, I don't think she's on here. That was just the other thing, but
she'll catch up with me.
She left a message earlier, so I don't know if she's gonna make it. I hope she's up here. But LaMonica is actually my cousin. Okay. That's another one of my cousins. Now, you helped me with my because he's Brian's uncle too. He's like our third great grand uncle or second great grand uncle, something like that. Right. And his name was Reverend W.M. Peterson. And on his particular headstone, there was the Mason symbol and everything. So I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do about it because I had one person who actually told me, oh, no, he couldn't have been a Mason because Black people couldn't be Masons. So, or they're saying not at that time, but I don't think they knew the history, or obviously.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, they didn't know the history. So,
remind me, was that South Carolina you were talking? Which state was that?
Yes, WM was in South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, we've been there since the Civil War.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, because I don't know. I still don't know, and I think that was something that you and I were going to get into to find out when he joined But you did find some information on him to say that he actually was a Mason. So how does a person go about, doing that type of Masonry?
You said that type of Masonry or that type of research?
I mean, that type of research. And LaMonica is here. She said, hey.
There you go. See, I told you she'll catch it. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I would say the biggest thing, obviously, people want to look for is, well, where are the records, right? Everybody says, where are the records? And the biggest things that I would say really are twofold. One is you cannot overlook newspapers, okay? Yes. Fraternal organizations, fraternal life was a lot more relevant to people of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century than for a lot of us today, unfortunately. A lot of newspapers, Black newspapers particularly, carried fraternal columns where they talked about what lodges were meeting in that town, and that was partially so that the community knew what type of activities were going on, as well as for members who either lived there or who maybe even were traveling to say, hey, well, I'm a Mason, or let's take it. We don't just have to focus on Masonry. We can look at other fraternal organizations like the Elks, the Odd Fellows, Knights of Pythias, what have you. If I'm a Knight of Pythias and I'm traveling through Mississippi, I look in the newspaper, oh, they have a lodge here. Maybe I can go visit, or maybe I can find a place to stay if I'm in need, or, maybe I'm looking for a job. I'm new to the area, that kind of thing. And so you can't overlook those because you will find oftentimes, elections being mentioned, sometimes problems, which I personally kind of like finding the problems because where there's one problem, there's always a story, some kind of controversy, what have you. You definitely cannot overlook those. Where I'm blessed at being a historian for my Grand Lodge is that I have a lot of access to what are called proceedings. Fraternal organizations are supposed to at least, and usually do, produce annual conference proceedings, just like a lot of organizations that we're in today. And so what I basically do is I not only look at the history as far as the fraternity is concerned, but I also try to take time out personally to look at the membership returns and find out, well, who were some of these people, particularly in areas that I'm interested in researching. And a lot of those type of things you're not going to really find. I mean, I found in all my years of genealogy research, I found one Prince Hall, one black fraternal proceeding online. So this is not something that you can just easily jump on some of these sites and find. Thankfully, something I think you and I were talking about this yesterday. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of your lodges, or at least grand lodges in different states, have libraries. We have one in DC. A lot of different states have one. Matter of fact, as far as Black Freemasonry goes, North Carolina has a very good library. I've never been there, but to my understanding, they have a very good one. Florida's actually getting. As a matter of fact, I need to send this over to you, Donya. For Florida's, they're about to have a whole exhibit open up in a museum down in Jacksonville on the history of Black Masonry in Florida. So a lot of people I find don't realize that those type of resources exist, and so they don't utilize them. You know, the biggest repository that I can recommend to people is the Iowa Masonic Library, which is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They have probably, I believe, the largest collection of not just Black, but Masonic history and artifacts, period. But they also have a lot on African Americans as well. And so if you're looking at a particular state, or you have some document or an artifact from a relative, I highly encourage people to contact them and say, hey, I'm looking for a Black Masonic lodge in this area. Can you help me? If going local doesn't help you first,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's one question that I had. It's something that Donnie and I had talked about when we discovered W.M. Peterson had been a Mason. We were also told that he couldn't have been a Mason because he had been enslaved, and that if you were enslaved, you couldn't be a Mason.
Right.
Is that just hearsay, or was there any truth to that?
He couldn't. Well, he wouldn't have been a Mason while he was enslaved. That's something that a lot of the white Masons at the time of that period tried to use against us and whatnot. And of course, I mean, put it like this: slavery itself, as far as we were concerned, was an illegitimate institution to begin with. So someone's status of being enslaved or not, as far as we were concerned during that period, would have been null and void. The fact is, if the gentleman you're talking about, the brother at that time, he joined, he wasn't a slave as far as we were concerned. So, right, okay.
Okay.
I mean, I can name you a bunch of runaways that became Grand Masters. Matter of fact, one of them was if anyone's familiar with Lewis Hayden of Boston, Massachusetts, he was a runaway from Kentucky. He became Grand Master.
Oh wow!
It was still a runaway. So I mean that, yeah. So
okay, well, so let's get into Mr. Matthews, Mr. Okay. Captain William D. Matthews.
Right on.
What drew you to him, and what made you start writing his story?
Oh man, I love telling this story. So actually, one day I was on this really scholarly site called Facebook, and this woman named Denisha Swanigan, who I believe she's in the chat right now. I believe
she is.
She had tagged me on a post, and she had found her and her sister. They found a letter from one of her uncles, whose name was John J. Bruce, to her other great uncle, Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce. For those who don't know, Senator Bruce was the first full-term African American to serve in Congress. Yes, I see Denisha's comment here. She said, "Here we go."
Yeah.
Yes, here we go. And so this letter really didn't have the content didn't have any Masonic value. Really, it was I believe it was J.J. Bruce was congratulating his brother on having gotten married. And again, Senator Bruce was the first full-term first African American to serve a full term in Congress, following behind Hiram Revels, who was also a Mason himself. And so She wanted to find out about the letterhead. And the letterhead was very specific. It was the letterhead of what is today known as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri, which it had a different name at that time. J.J. Bruce at that time was serving as the Grand Treasurer. And we're talking about, I think, 1870, somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head. And so I kind of was trying to explain to her a little bit about who we were, what his position was, some of the historical context of in which they would have been interacting as far as their Masonic lives was concerned. And then she passed on something else to me, which really was the seed for this book. She passed on a newspaper article from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, dated in 1869. It was about late April, early May of 1869. And this article talked about another great uncle of hers by the name of Henry C. Bruce. Okay. Now, Henry Bruce was serving as Grand Lecturer in the state of Kansas. Okay. And what had happened was that he had been shot by a gentleman named Alan Pinks. Okay. This newspaper article detailed that the Masons in Leavenworth, Kansas, led by Captain William D. Matthews, found the guy and gunned him down in broad daylight in front of the sheriff and everybody, like any kind of classic Hollywood, Western. and they rode off, and and I was like, wait, what?
I think I would have been that way too.
Right. I mean, to give you some more context on my reaction, you have to remember at this time in my historical research, I'm used to finding these great abolitionists and stories of Civil War soldiers and politicians and civil rights lawyers who were Masons. And I'm like, wait, they shot him down in the street and rode off.
Right.
Like, wait, what? I really didn't have much to go on at first, but I knew who William D. Matthews was. I knew about his Civil War service, and I also knew that there was this excuse me, I'm coughing a little bit, I'm sorry. I knew that there was a broader story with him as far as our organization is concerned, because what happened was that in the early 1800s, okay, I got to go back to come forward, okay? So
right.
We're going to practice Sankofa for a second, all right? We're going to look back and come forward.
Okay.
So Prince Hall establishes African Lodge in Boston. Then the second African Lodge is established in Philadelphia under a guy named, anyone ever heard of Absalom Jones or Bishop Richard Allen? From the never heard of him. Bishop
Have you, Brian?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Excuse me. Absalom Jones and Richard Allen were founders of the Free African Society in Philadelphia. Richard Allen is the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Okay. So early on, you see the link between Black Freemasonry and African Methodism. All right. Even though there's not an official link, there's a historical tie. Okay. Looks like we lost Donya. I guess she'll.
No, I'm here.
So anyway, what happens in Pennsylvania is that Absalom Jones becomes the first Grand Master there in Pennsylvania. And after his death, there's a split in the organization to make it easy on you. This split between the Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania metastasizes up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And again, we're talking in the 1830s, 1840s. A gentleman by the name of John T. Hilton, who at that time was serving as the head of the Massachusetts brothers, calls together a meeting of all the legitimate and illegitimate children of African Lodge and says, look, we've got to solve this problem. This infighting has to stop. So what they do is they form what was called a National Grand Lodge on June 24th of 1847. Okay? So you have a National Grand Lodge that was supposed to govern the individual state Grand Lodges, which govern the individual lodges in the local towns or whatever, right?
Okay.
So they formed this structure, and even though white Americans had said they wanted one, they never had one. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Pardon me.
That's okay.
So they formed this structure, and this was basically the rule of law for most Black Masons from 1847 up through the 1870s. Okay, in the late 1870s, all hell broke loose, and there was a movement to dismantle the National Grand Lodge. Okay, so I in my lodge and where my membership is, we are descended from the group that left the National Grand Lodge. Okay, Captain Matthews, however, was the leader of the group that wanted to keep this National Grand Lodge structure going. You follow me?
Yeah.
So in a lot of the literature that I read early in my Masonic career and whatnot, where he's basically mentioned as a bad guy to make it simple.
Right.
And the fact that Denisha had this letter talking about how he went and avenged her uncle's shooting. Thankfully, her uncle survived the gunshots. I said, wait a minute. No one ever told this story. I never heard this. I asked people who I thought would know more about it and knew more about him, and no one could really answer the questions I had, And so over time, what ended up happening was I wanted to expand and learn more about him, his lodge, his Grand Lodge, and what I realized I was uncovering was the true history of how Black Freemasonry got to the Old West. And it was a history that had been written out of a lot of our published documents and books and whatnot, in part because of how William Matthews liked to govern at that time, and also because of his ardent support of this National Grand Lodge that we once had in place.
Okay.
Well, I have to say, listening to you speak, it just reminds me how that early period in Reconstruction was such a vibrant and exciting period. I mean, we have political activism. We have people founding what would become historical Black universities, Freemasons, learning and just striving. It frustrates me because so much of that has been wiped out of the history books.
Right, exactly. And the thing about it with this particular story is that this is all black folks. Sometimes when you talk Reconstruction, you're talking about, the Dixiecrats coming back in power and stuff like that. Well, in this particular instance, this was Black men in the West, and the more I was researching, I said, oh my God, the Captain Matthews organized. Not only did he organize the first Kansas Colored Volunteers, which became the 79th, they're the first regiment to see combat during the Civil War. Okay, he made a run for the Kansas State Legislature. He lost that run, but he did try. He organizes the Masons out west. He actually organized the first couple lodges there pre-Civil War. Okay, and then he forms what was called the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas in 1867. Okay, and he basically expands his power base from Kansas into Colorado, up into Wyoming, Arkansas, Oklahoma Territory, Indian Territory, Texas. All the lodges that formed the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas came from William Matthews. So this guy was no joke. And he, I think he was born to play the role of being like the Grand Master of the West for Black men because. The very thought that they were shooting, we shot back, that was a very powerful statement for me. So I wanted to basically, the more information that we found, Denisha and I kept in touch all these years. And we, she was there with me every step of the way. And the more information we found, it was just like we kept bumping into these iconic figures of African American history but people don't look at them in this particular light or see these relationships. So that's where the book came from.
Well, I have to say I tip my hat off to Mr. Matthews, because not that there was any part of the country that was kind to Black folk at that time period.
Right.
The West was like off the chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just so amazing to me because
Tiffany, and that's the thing. I think we have to look and realize that we didn't have elected officials, up until Reconstruction, right? And so we still had some of those same issues that any other group of people are going to have, particularly for free Blacks. When there's conflict in the community, who do you go to when there's a shooting or there's someone's beating their wife or something? A lot of times it's these fraternal organizations I don't want to compare them to the mafia, but you get that type of, we take care of our own type of mentality. And so being a part of a lodge at that time was something that was to be coveted and also something to be respected. The idea that these men were organized enough to say, all right, we're going to get this guy. And not only did they get him, they got arrested for it, went to trial, and got off.
We know somebody like that.
I couldn't make this stuff up. So, in finding the history, I said, wow, I really wanted to give this story back to not only the fraternity, but really to the general public as well, because I just thought it was a really great story. And then to expand it more to find out about his version of events, because as far as this whole split between our National Grand Lodge and the independent Grand Lodges was concerned, this is something that, if as far as Black Masons are concerned, this is something that is still like a really deep, deep wound today. I just got yelled at last week at a conference by somebody because they asked me, how dare I write the story of William Matthews? He was a this and that and this and that. This is 2019. This was like a week ago, right? No. So that shows us that historical memory in organizations and families, they can still be very relevant, even though things happened over 100-something years ago.
So, well, let me ask you this question, because I wanted to go two-part. There's actually a couple of questions. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. So that was basically the the crux of the book in and of itself. And then, like I said, we dive into Captain Matthews' life quite a bit. We go into understanding how he spread the lodges and whatnot. And what I tried to do, because this book really started out as a genealogical, inquiry, I tried to make sure that we included as much information as possible so that people can use it, not only use it to read the story, but to use it as a research tool. We documented what lodges that he established and where they were as much as I could. I tried to write about not only him, but others important brothers of that time period as well who contributed to the story. I think one of the greatest finds I think that we found was a gentleman by the name of Reverend William R. Carson. Now, Reverend Carson was formerly a deputy under William Matthews. When I say deputy, I mean a deputy Grand Master. And Reverend Carson, not only was he possibly the first Black Mason in Texas, he was present at the Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. We found documentation where Reverend Carson claimed to be Robert E. Lee's son.
Oh,
wow!
Yeah, and I got a picture of him too. James? It's in the book.
James, can you hear
if you
me?
look at the picture, you go, wait a minute.
James, can you hear me?
He might have been telling the truth here, Yeah. So again, this is another aspect of for those of us who are into genealogy that I think is something that needs to be looked at as well when we look at some of these fraternal organizations, is finding these family connections not only within Black America, but we also find them across the color line as well, which was really awesome to see. She's
James,
back.
can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I was always here. You just couldn't hear me. I don't know why. So I have two questions. One is from, well, actually both questions are from Tiffany. But before I post her question up, one of the things that I was going to say, as far as, when we were talking about people who are our ancestors who were a part of the Reconstruction period and how vibrant Brian said that it was during that time and everything. And you made the comment, you actually made this statement, we take care of our own, not right. Sounding like a mafia. But do you not think that that's what actually happened with Black people back then? Did they actually start taking care of each other? Because I actually believe that that's what was going on, because I don't think it really would have been possible for them to make the kind of strides that they made within that short period of time in the Reconstruction era, that it scared those who were against us, right. And started the Black codes and started the Jim Crow and do you think that that's what they were doing from the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I love talking about Reconstruction, because you can see very clearly that, yeah, we had been knocked on our behinds by slavery in many regards, but the moment them chains got off, brothers and sisters went to work, And so you can see that. That's why I love doing these type of talks, especially about this subject, because I love the look on people's faces when people ask me about like when did the Masons start, and I tell them like, yeah, well, we've had lodges in Louisiana since pre-Civil War.
Wow.
People
so
go, what?
let me so let me say, let me post Tiffany's question.
Okay.
Tiffany said first question she had was, what part of the West is this?
Okay, the book primarily focuses on Kansas, but then expands out because Kansas was the base for Captain Matthews' Grand Lodge, which was called the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. But don't let the name fool you, because during this period, particularly the Reconstruction era, he had jurisdiction over Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, Arkansas, Oklahoma Territory, Indian Territory, and Texas, and possibly a couple other places that I didn't find. So yeah.
Okay. And then her next question was, what are your thoughts on a black man joining a white lodge? Is that beneficial?
I would say this. Our organization is founded on principles of universal brotherhood and a belief in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. And so it doesn't bother me where a man, I don't care what color he is, what lodge he joins, as long as it's a legitimate one, and I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay.
As long as he's a good man, as long as he's a worthy man, and he joins a true lodge, that doesn't bother me at all.
Okay. Deborah, well, we'll get to that, Deborah. We're definitely going to, she asked about where we could get the book and things, but we're going to definitely get to that. So what other things can you, well, Brian, wait, I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
No, I was just responding to Deborah.
Oh, okay. So what other things about him did you find? Because according to Denisha, she said that it was really great at the fact that you guys, was able to find him in the newspapers, because it was so many stories that were there,
Right.
that went untold until your book. So is there any other story that you kind of covered in the book that, should be said or should be talked about?
Oh man, this guy was, let me tell you something. You guys would not believe the antics and things this guy got into.
Yes, we would.
I mean, I mean, like literally, like everybody who's read the book has been like, man, there's got to be a movie, a Netflix series, or something on this guy, because he just so much stuff that he was involved in. I mean, between having a shootout over his wife, to running for Congress, to getting arrested for not paying for dry cleaning.
Wow.
This guy was just all over the place. And then, he was a very, very militant, active race man as well. Matter of fact, in his run for the state legislature, he did run as a Republican, but he refused to take money from white philanthropists. He didn't want any money from whites for his campaigning or anything. Because he said in so many words that if he believed that politicians were loyal to those who paid them, and so if black people paid him, black people would know that he would be loyal to them.
Oh, maybe we need to adopt that now.
Right? Yeah. So he really was a race man. He really was ahead of his time in some regards. And again, one of the things that kind of struck me was how mobile he was. But again, this is the era of the Transcontinental Railroad and whatnot. There was one time he actually got robbed. He had set up the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, got their officers installed. On his way home, he was robbed, and he told the guys who robbed him that was his favorite purse, and that he wanted it back. And they beat him up or whatever. A couple weeks later, he published in the newspaper that he got his purse back. How he did that, I don't know, but
he got his purse back.
That's what he said he did, and so we're just gonna kind of go with it. I mean, I don't know.
So, but I'm gonna say this. Mm-hmm. He sounds, and Brian, you can come with me on this one. I think you're gonna agree. He sounds like John.
Oh no, he does. He definitely does.
And it's making me think that the men in that time who were educated, who did know certain things, who were able to really speak out and stand up, were all like that. Because he's very similar to my grandfather's second cousin. Right. He's very similar. I mean, when I tell you John Yeldale had no problem mincing his words, he did not mince words at all.
Well,
he had no issue.
They were contemporaries. They were alive at the same time.
Yeah.
And in their way, they were both fighting the same kind of fight.
Well, you know, I had a professor back in college who once made a statement that back in those days they made black men out of steel and iron.
Yes, sir.
And so I think that, you know, just the times they lived in. I mean, William Matthews, now mind you, he's a few years younger than, but he was raised in the same community basically as Frederick Douglass. You know, and I talk about his friendship and his relationship with Frederick Douglass in the book there. You know, the difference is Matthews is a couple years younger and he's born free. Now, sometimes being born free can be a little scary than being born enslaved in the aspect of you got something to lose now. If you're born enslaved, you're already enslaved, you know. But if you're born free, you've got something to be fearful of losing in that regard. You know what I mean? So yeah. I think that the things he saw, his travels, you know, he was very educated, not necessarily formally. He didn't go to school at all, but you can read his writings and whatnot. You can see this guy was very educated. He had fought in war. And I mean, when they fought, I believe it was the Battle of Poison Springs, if I recall correctly, his unit, they lost 700 men and won. So if you lost 700 men and still won the fight, how many did you take out? You know? Right. That's going to make you that's going to make you a different type of person.
Wow. Yeah. So, I have some comments up here. One was given by Denicia. She said let me pull it up. She says, in my opinion, the men who were Freemasons during Reconstruction were responsible for bringing structure to our people and taught our ancestors how to function post-slavery. Now, if that's the case, what do you think is going on now? Because we don't function like they did back then. And you have so many people that come back and say, you know, oh, you know, people can try this, but I'm not my ancestor. In other words, they don't know. It gives you straight proof that they have no idea that they really may want to be their ancestor because their ancestors became and did some things that allowed them to be able to say, I'm not my ancestor.
Right. When people say stuff like that, it just shows me that they're just talking about what they don't know and haven't read. You know, everybody wasn't. I mean, you can't name me the year when black people were not fighting for liberty, freedom, justice, and equality. I'll wait.
I know that's right.
And not just black people in the United States, in Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, wherever.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you can't. When people say that, it's just, again, people fight for black studies and then they don't go to class. Okay. So, but if we for those of us who go to class, what we know is we'll look and we'll find people like a Captain Matthews. You'll find people like Martin Delaney or Richard Gleaves or some of these other individuals. A lot of them, and this is the thing that I think is really important, particularly about the Masonic history of African America, is that these people were networked. They were connected. They were coordinating things, even pre-Civil War, in ways that people still aren't really dealing with in an academic environment. Not to my satisfaction, anyway. And so, to be able to tell these type of stories, I mean, a good percentage of your Reconstruction era politicians, I mean, the vast majority, they're Prince Hall Masons, and they're not just Masons, but they're like leaders of the organization. And so what does that tell you about the understanding of electoral politics in Black America during that period? And not just during that period, but even down at least through the first half of the 20th century as well. It shows you how we understand community, how we understand community economics, you know, in business relationships and whatnot, family relationships as well. You know, you don't have to guess or hypothesize about it. You can read what they said and read what they wrote. You know, right. It's something that I wish more of us were engaging in the documentation, as I know you guys do here on Genealogy Adventures and whatnot. You know, we got to do more of it. You know, Denisha, she mentioned something all the time whenever Matthews comes up, is that when we started doing the research, not only was he connected to her Uncle Henry, but he was also connected to one of her other ancestors who was also a Civil War soldier. You know, they went on a mission together. Matthews was over here with her cousin. He was over here. You know, so we're seeing some of these very important men in history. They weren't just these like today we have what they call what's the phrase they say public intellectuals that you never meet.
Right.
You know, you never, you know, somebody, I'm not going to name names, but some of these pastors I see on TV behind certain politicians, I go, who's that? I never heard of them before. You know, back in those days, yeah, I'm talking about the orange person. Yeah, I'm talking about him. Some of these people of that time period, however, you knew who they were because they were, oh yeah, that person, he's district deputy grand master, or she's the, you know, she was worthy matron of the local chapter, or they're the most exalted ruler of the Elks, or, you know, this is how people organize. And so when someone steps out there and says, hey, I now want to run for state or local office or federal office or whatever, there's a different relationship than just getting a flyer under your door, you know, or it's a different relationship at the time, and that's what these brothers were doing back then.
Well, I'll share something that really, really frustrates me, and I'm going to sound like my dad, who's no longer with us, but I'm channeling my father. The thing that really frustrates me is we have this wonderful thing called Google Books,
right?
And specifically for the older books that are out of copyright, you can download the whole book for free and read it and read about this stuff. You can pretty much read about anything that you want to read about. So it's not even like the information's not out there. It's just people aren't reading it.
Right. Exactly. And that's really the problem, I think, today. And that's why I don't like trying to reinvent wheels. Wheels have been around for a long time. We can study the wheel. We can, you know, we can use it, but to try to reinvent it over and over again, I think is ridiculous. You know, I'm much more into let's build on what's already been there. So instead of saying I'm not my ancestors, no, I am my ancestors. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be an even better version of them because they fought so that I could have some liberties to do some things they couldn't. You know,
that's so awesome.
And to me, that's one of the beauties of the work that I do in researching Black institutions is you can see generation after generation of how they've had to deal with problems and, you know, and move past them and then maybe have to deal with it again. But hey, now we've got some more tools that we can work past. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think institution building, you know, as a whole is so important. You know, everybody today, it's easy to just get your credit card out, jump on some of these websites and sign up for a genealogy account or an ancestry or whoever. And that's fine. I have one too. That's fine. I'm happy to bum off your account if you give me your password. And so, but there's also something still about being a part of a local genealogy society, whether it be OGS or whoever, right? I think there's still something to that because you get a human interaction that's different than just sitting on a computer all day. I think computers are great. I love my iPad, but being isolated from other human beings is not, to me, that's not the goal.
Right.
True.
So, and it's funny that you even mentioned, you know, other genealogical organizations like OGS, because I actually we had a meeting yesterday, and we had a presentation from a woman by the name of Benita Lindley, and she gave this awesome presentation about her story. She also has a book, her thread run something. What is it? The threads that run through her history, her story. That's what it is. And the thing that got me about her is how she discussed and talked about the families in the early 1900s in the DC area, like before my family even got here. My family got here in 28. And but she was talking earlier than that, and she was giving all of this information about how they did things and how they took care of each other. And I guess coming to DC was considered coming north, and how there was a few white families that lived on the same block as some of her ancestors, and how they would protect them as well. So it was always going on. A protection was always happening, and they were always fighting to just constantly move forward. But we started getting into the conversation of educating our children and why these certain things are going on.
Right.
What are your people might be against me on what I'm getting ready to say, but there were two incidents here in the DC area that I'm sure you heard about. One in Loudoun County about the teacher and teaching a slave game, and then another one, somebody handing out cotton to all of the kids or what have you. Yeah. So do you think those things were purposely done?
Not being that.
Or do you think, let me finish it. Do you think they were purposely done, or do you think that they hear us and they want to tell our stories? And so they try to do it the best way they can, but the bottom line is they can't tell our stories. We have to do it. We have to be included. So what do you think? Because that's my thought process.
I'm not in the business of trying to make sense out of crazy, but if I'm going to respond to the question, I guess I would say that I think that I don't think that some of these people, when things like that occur, are that they're intentionally offensive, but the programming is so deep in our society that people automatically do things, automatically say things because that's the programming, right? So I can't be responsible for trying to reprogram somebody else and what their program is going to be about. Only thing I can worry about is what's going on in my house and what, I don't have children, but if I did, making sure they know what's acceptable and what's not. And understanding what self-respect is for themselves as well as for their ancestors that came, before them. That slavery game thing is something that, why would you do that? Like common sense. What, just as a professional, why would you do that? But everybody, again, that programming is just so ingrained in some folks. And then I think because there's a lack of real cultural understanding in America. Segregation is no longer legal, as far as our public institutions are concerned. But I think as a society, we don't allow for enough crossover of understanding. So when you hear NWA saying after police, if you happen to have a father who's a police officer and you live in this, upper class suburb, whatever, you might not be able to relate. I don't care how great the beat is, you might not be able to relate to that. But if you grow up in an area where the police are seen as a predatory force, or where you've had to have sit downs with your parents, I've never been to jail, but I had my parents had to sit me down and talk to me about, well, James, the police, and there's a different relationship there. So I think that if there was more understanding of these type of things, which of course we all know is rooted in America's original sin, then maybe we would see some changes. But some things that are good for one segment of the population have proven to be bad for another segment of the population. So somehow those things have to even out. How that happens, I don't know.
Okay.
So I have a genealogical question for you.
Okay.
So I've been doing my, say for instance, I've been doing some workup and some research on ancestors or cousins, and I find out that a few of them were Freemasons. Mm-hmm. So what would you advise to be the next step? I mean, how accessible are the records? What are the steps that I would have to go through to gain access to see them?
Well, it would depend on, to some extent, my answer would depend on the state that you're talking about. Because I admit some states are better than others. The Iowa Masonic Library is definitely a go-to place, that I would recommend, reaching out to. And finding out what proceedings are available for that particular state. Prayerfully, they're available for the time period which you're looking for. I'm not sure. Is there a state that you have in mind, or are you just asking generally?
Oh, just in general.
Just generally, yeah. So that would be one of the main things I would do. I would also try to find, if you have an artifact, a document, or something that can help narrow down, because there are thousands of lodges in existence today, and probably way more that have gone in. That have died out over the years. So if you can find out, well, which lodge is it, or at least get an understanding of, well, if he was a member, let's say, of here in DC, if he was in the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, chances are that I can find something on him, or at least can help you find the lodge. But again, we're a smaller place where, it's just DC isn't but so big. When you go to places like Alabama, Texas, Mississippi, I mean, they've had thousands of lodges over the past 150 years or so. So again, not to say that you can't find the record, because it's very possible you can, but again, there's going to be more documentation to kind of sift through, and reaching out to those individual Grand Lodges as well, and finding out, hey, who is the Grand Historian for this state? And again, not just for the Masons, but if you find somebody who's a member of the Elks or the Odd Fellows or the Good Samaritans, try to find that, reach out to some of these organizations, because you'd be surprised at what some of these lodges and Grand Lodges still have in their possession. You really would be shocked.
Well, actually, you raise a really interesting point. So, for instance, say I have an ancestor who was a member of a branch that is closed. What, in general, would happen to all of those records? Would they be passed on to another chapter?
Well, what's supposed to happen is it's supposed to go to the Grand Lodge of that state. Now, what they do with them, if they keep them, or again, that's state by state. If you have somebody who is, again, if you reach out to the state's historian, that would be the best answer I could give for a lodge that's no longer functional. But again, the proceedings of a Grand Lodge really tell its story. So if you go year after year, if you have an idea of when that lodge died out, or maybe you don't, you can still go back in the proceedings and say, well, what was the lodge in this community? What was the name? Where was it? And you can try kind of track it from there. Again, it's just reaching out to some of those libraries and saying, hey, what do you have? And again, local historical societies also oftentimes have some really amazing things in their collections as well. And again, those local newspapers. I mean, if a new lodge pops up, or even if one dies out, you probably will find it in those newspapers. What I find is a lot of people don't look at the fraternal columns of newspapers because they don't know what it's talking about. But sometimes you just sit there and read it, even if you don't understand it all. Just sit there and read it to try to get an understanding.
Right. So that brings, talking about the lodges and everything, that actually brings me to my next question. You sent me a link for the Prince Hall think tank.
Yes.
And you wanted me to share that, so I am sharing it right now. Why don't you tell us something about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Prince Hall Think Tank is a show that I co-host and co-founded with Dave Gillarm, who's the Grand Historian of Georgia, Dr. Ken Collins, who's the Grand Historian of Alabama, which is actually where my mother's family is from, and Antonio Caffey, who is the Grand Historian of Ohio. And we basically saw some other similar type of programming out there, but nothing that was really focusing on the African-American Masonic, story. And so what we decided to do was we put out, episodes once a month, last Sunday of every month. We talk about different topics. Because you got 4 Grand Historians who started it, we have Brother Curtis Black from Texas and Preston Collins from Ohio also on as well. So you're going to have a lot of episodes there on history. Some of the episodes, or a good portion of them, are ones that are kind of more geared towards our membership. Nothing really secretive, but just things that are like about lodge business stuff and how to get members, that type of thing. But a lot of our episodes really deal with the history of the organization, so that's why I wanted to make sure that I shared it. We've done episodes talking about not only the early history of Black Freemasonry, but we really try to dive into different topics such as the history of Black Freemasonry and the Underground Railroad, which, if you don't understand Black Freemasonry, I don't understand how you're going to fully understand the Underground Railroad. We've talked about the history of Black Masonry in the AME Church. We've looked at states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania. We've tried to delve into different states and talk about not only their records, but what makes their individual state Grand Lodges, unique, and who were some of the interesting people that were involved with them as well. So, I wanted to share that as well, because a lot of times folks will say, well, hey, this is all great, but they want to try to get something is applicable to them. So, So yeah, and we haven't covered every single state yet, but we're working on it.
Okay.
Actually, that kind of makes sense, because from what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that the Masons were part of that. It was a pillar in the community, just like religious centers and education centers. So it would make sense that they would all work together. Absolutely.
Matter of fact, there's a quote from the. May I read from my book?
Sure.
May I read a quote from the book? All right. This is actually a quote from Joseph Walks, who was the founder of our Philaxis Research Society, which is an organization I'm also a part of as well. And it kind of goes right to your point, Brian. He said that he actually wrote this in the history of Prince Hall Masons in Louisiana. He said, the history of Prince Hall Freemasonry is in reality the history of the Black experience in America. In fact, if one wanted to explore Black history, one could do so equally as well by perusing the proceedings of the various Prince Hall Grand and individual lodges. While the Black church, Black educational institutions, the Black press, and in later years, Black civil rights organizations have been publicly perceived as the hegemony of Black America, this perception may have been misleading, for none of these Black institutions could match the quiet, determined, persistent role of leadership that came from the Masonic lodges of Prince Hall Freemasonry. And often hidden from view and unknown to the public is the fact that the leaders of many of these institutions were, for the most part, led by or sustained by Prince Hall Freemasons.
Wow.
Interesting. That's interesting. Powerful.
Yeah. That's very powerful. That's what I was getting ready to say. It's powerful.
Yeah.
So we had a few questions down here. Some of them we can answer. I want to go down to Tiffany. Tiffany asked, what was his ancestry? Only reason why I didn't put your question up, Tiffany, is because we've actually already answered it. And yes, they're out of Maryland. Tiffany and Brian are related on one way, and Tiffany and I are related on another. Brian has already pointed out that the Matthews started out in Maryland, and this particular Matthew, if I'm not mistaken, you said he was from Maryland?
Yes, he was. Yeah. He traced his lineage back to. Now I know his father's name was Joseph Matthews. I don't know anything beyond that on his father's side. I know his mother's name was, I believe, was Henrietta Wyatt. And she was the daughter of a Frenchman by the name of Noah Wyatt, and an enslaved woman. And that's something that Captain Matthews said himself about his family background. In doing the research, I did find that Brother Walks, who I just quoted, he had done some previous work researching Captain Matthews' life, and there was a magazine issue of our Philaxis Research Journal that had Captain Matthews' photo on it back in the 80s, right? So this went out, across the country, and one of the brothers who was alive at the time, named Alvin Harkless Swiggett, he was a very high-ranking Mason at that time, and he happened to be Captain Matthews' great-grandnephew. And he goes, what the heck is my uncle's picture doing on this magazine? And so that prompted a follow-up to the initial article that kind of delved into the family genealogy a bit. Matter of fact, as a side note, Captain Matthews' brother-in-law was actually William H. Carney, the Medal of Honor winner.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then we had some other ones, some other questions up here. I think I started something when I asked that question about, the teachers and all of that, and that took us off track just a little bit. And I want to apologize, but Michelle, I think Brian and I may have a discussion about actually having a special show about that. So we want to hold on to your question or your response for that, as opposed to this, because it takes it completely off topic. But I hear you. Just so people can see what she said. Oh, I just lost it. So, but there are some other questions, and I don't want Michelle to think we weren't listening to her. I definitely hear you. Nick Daniels asked, were these records digitized? And you actually already answered that one, that no, they're really not. You found maybe one. This was somebody that came on late. And then there was another question by Deborah Singleton, who actually said, are the Eastern Stars? Okay, go ahead.
Well, before we move on to that question, I want to touch on that one more time. You have to remember, and this is one of the things that I would highly encourage just in general for family history researchers to keep in mind when you're looking at organizational records, right? They weren't written for genealogical or research purposes, right?
Right.
So don't be surprised or discouraged when I say that no, it's not digitized, because people go, well, why not? Well, they're not for family research. They really were for the organization. And people have to remember, these organizations aren't exhibits somewhere. These are living, breathing institutions that still exist. So, sometimes it does pay to just have good manners and just knock on the door and say, hi, my name is such and such, and I'm just hoping that, you guys have a historian or a library somewhere, or, I'm just looking for something. Can you help me, please? It doesn't hurt to say please and thank you and whatnot. Because and the reason why I mention that is because I have people sometimes who will tell me, well, yeah, I went to the local lodge in my area, or I was researching my grandparents, and I went and asked them to give me the records on this, and they closed the door in my face. And I'm like, yeah, because you were rude. Or you just, or maybe you didn't understand that, well, yeah, you're talking to the cleanup person. So sometimes it just pays to just have a little patience and just use good manners, and to remember that your family history journey isn't what these records were necessarily meant for. However, they can be utilized to help you in that journey. So yeah.
Well, I think that's the same for things like the certain database, like certain directories that we find. Some of these things, they weren't specific, they weren't written for genealogy, but they help. So I definitely understand where you come from with that. And that's probably why Nick is asking that particular question. You got a lot of things that weren't specifically written for wasn't done for genealogy, but now that they're out there, they're digitizing them because there is so much information in them. You got all these different directories. I know at the Daughters of the American Revolution, we utilize those. I can't think of the name of those books. They're records of town hall meetings that were going on, and they utilize those town hall meeting records something severe. So I can, and those town hall meeting records weren't set up to do genealogical research, but they have a massive amount of information.
Right.
So I can definitely understand what you're saying, and knocking on the door, like you said, is not a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So, using good manners sometimes. I mean, again, we have organizations that aren't in existence anymore, and the records are just somewhere in the library. That's one thing. When you're talking about an institution that's still functioning, and you want to utilize some of their materials or whatever, sometimes it just pays to just say hi. Who's who's that one person around here who knows everything?
Right.
Just say it nicely. You'd be surprised. You get more. You always get more flies with honey than you will with vinegar.
Well, I have to agree, because I have an example of this where one of my 2 times great uncles in Virginia was one of the early teachers at the Hampton Institute.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm a Howard graduate.
Those HU guys.
I mean no offense whatsoever.
Yes, sir.
But I sent them an email, and I was being as polite as I could. I was like, I've just recently understand, this is his name, this is when he was there. If it's at all possible, can you give me any more information? Well, the woman that received the email was so touched. Off of her own back, she went into the archives and found a photograph. It was like a stock photograph from like the first year of its existence, and he was in it.
Wow.
He was in it.
Is she there? Is she there? And I think Denisha is also a good example of this, because when she first contacted me, she'll tell you, if she was on here, she said that she didn't even approach me about anything for a while, because she kind of like watched me on Facebook and different things I would say or whatever. And then she finally asked me, and again, she gave me, you have to think about it, right? We're still an organization. People get very touchy. They get very spooky. Not touchy. They get very spooky, and downright. Some people are just downright concerned. I'm concerned about some people because they hear the word the Masons and they just go, "Oh my God, you guys have the nuclear codes and you have this and you have that." And it's like, well, I got to pay my cable bill. Like, well, I don't even have cable. I sling now. Right? I'm a slinger. Like people don't understand that. Like, no, treat it like you would any other institution. You wouldn't knock on a church door and just start blabbering off and talk. No, there's a certain way you do things. And so I think just having good common sense and good old fashioned courtesy, and being direct and say, hey, this is what I have. Can you help me? What do you have? That really can help. But and not saying that the questioner, the question wasn't wrong, but sometimes I have people will say, well, oh, it's not digital. Oh, well, it must not be important. Well, that's not true.
That's not true. That's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, then the other question was, are the Eastern Stars a part of the Freemasons?
Yes and no. The Order of the Eastern Star is a female auxiliary organization that's connected to Freemasonry. Um, so yes and no. Um, but they definitely play a very intricate and intimate role in our history. I really wish that there was more scholarship out there on sisters in the Eastern Stars, because I know that story is one that needs to be told. Thankfully, I know a sister here in DC who is currently working on that, and I wish I had 10 more just like her. Well, no, I got about 2 or 3 like her, but I wish I had 10 more.
Wow.
Because the story of Black women in fraternal organizations is something that I think is very important and needs to be told. And I think, and I tell people all the time that I don't think I'm the person to do that, because I think that's a woman's job to tell women's stories. But I'm here to support in whatever way I can in telling those stories. Matter of fact, one of the oldest Eastern Star chapters among Black women actually is here in DC, Queen Esther chapter number 1. So hopefully more of those stories will get told, not just about Eastern Stars, but about other female-led organizations like the Sisters of the Mysterious 10. Like Maggie L. Walker with the Order of St. Luke down in Virginia. Which, by the way, for those who don't know, the Order of St. Luke, under Maggie L. Walker's leadership, they had a bank, the St. Luke Emporium. They had their own newspaper. Again, and this was one of the most vibrant Black organizations of the latter half of the 19th century and the first couple decades of the 20th century, right? Who's doing that research and who's utilizing those records? I mean, I know that the Library of Virginia has the Saint, I think it was the St. Luke Herald was the name of their newspaper. I don't know anybody who's really doing anything with that information, but I know for those of us who are into family history, if you got to have some kind of link to Virginia some kind of way,
right?
So who's doing that research? Who's utilizing that?
Right.
We've got work to do.
Well, if I can ask a favor, the colleague of yours who's researching the Eastern Stars in DC,
right.
You could pass her contact information on to Donya. We'd love to have her on.
Love to. Sure. Love to. Yeah. There was another question where Denicia asked, what did she say? She said, approximately when did the Order of Eastern Star chapter begin?
That is a good question. Queen Esther chapter started in 1874. There were a couple chapters that existed before that. The oldest one being Jephthah number 1, North Carolina, and we don't exactly know when it started. And
wow.
I'm going to leave it at that so I can keep my job.
Okay.
Let me give you background. There's a bit of a, not a controversy, but the traditional history says Queen Esther chapter number 1 was the first chapter. That was what was written. And then later research found these other chapters. But like I said, Queen Esther is here in DC, and I'm the historian for DC, so I'm just going to try to keep my job.
Okay, gotcha. Well, you know what, James? This was awesome. Like I told you yesterday when we were doing our little test, our tech test, the show is slotted for an hour, but we always go over, and we are way over. It's an hour and 20 whole minutes. This has been an awesome conversation. And oh, Tiffany said her mom has been an Eastern Star since 1982.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, so but I want to thank you again for just coming out and talking with us and everything. And guys, we have placed the links for the think tank. We've placed the link for the book. There's also a Facebook page. All you have to do is search the Empire, the Lost Empire, and the rest of the name of the book, which is The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, 1867 to 1906. There is a Facebook link. You can also buy the book from there. You can buy the book from the link that we gave you. One last, I guess, final question. Do you have any upcoming events where you're speaking or doing any book signings in different areas, things of that nature?
Yes, actually I do. I'm actually going to be speaking at the Oh man, I want to make sure I say Bethel Dukes, the Bethel Dukes branch of Asala, here in DC. I'm going to be there on April the 28th. They meet at the Woodridge Library, which is, I believe is on Rhode Island Avenue. So I'll be there speaking on the book, and I have a couple other pending events. I'm supposed to be going. I got invited to New York. So look out. So be on the lookout for that. I'll be posting that on social media and whatnot as well. Possibly, potentially Texas, which I'm very excited to go to try to go to Texas to talk about the book. We just got back from New Mexico last week promoting the book. A matter of fact,
yes, the award.
We won the Charles H. Wesley Medal for History. So the book is now an award-winning book. So I've been all over the place. The book has been out since December. We've been to New Jersey, which is my home state. We've been here in Maryland. We had a book launch here in DC. So the reception has been really great, and I'm just very excited to be telling the story. And I'm very thankful to Denisha for asking me that question 4 years ago. I keep telling her just not to ask me any more questions because this really started off with like one Facebook post and a newspaper article, and then it expanded into taking over my life for 4 years.
Yeah.
Now 5 years basically. So Well, but I've been very blessed.
She is to you what I am to Donya. I made Donya write an entire chapter for her book.
There you go. There you go. Well, see, if Denisha was here, I'm sure she would say you need to come harder than that because she got me doing a 500-page book. Which again,
I'm telling you, they those Brian and Denishas, they are off the chain. They are some worrisome people. Brian literally waited until my book was completed, and do you know, my first chapter was the last chapter written because he said, "Oh,
wow,
you're missing a chapter," and I'm like, "What? You need to write the first chapter." I have a first chapter. And he was like, "No, you got a whole nother chapter you need to write." And I'm like, "Oh my God."
You there?
So,
and I'll tell you something which is crazy is that I'm actually editing another book for a friend of mine. And so it's dealing with Masons in Oklahoma. And one of the people in that particular book, come to find out, his son or grandson or something like that intermarried with Denisha's Bruce relative. So that story connects to this story that we already wrote about. And it's like, oh God, I just told her, I said, look, I quit. I don't want to hear from you, your family. I love Denisha, but I'm like, good Lord.
Yeah, and she's sitting up here, she's saying that you don't mean that, and she said how she stayed in your ear every day. She sounds exactly like Brian, and I told Brian the same thing. I don't want to talk to you no more. I'm done. When we went through that Moses Williams thing and finding out that man had 45 children, right. That's why I was very adamant. I'm like, Brian, I'm not doing that research for 45 kids. You can forget it.
Right.
And what am I doing? I'm doing research for 45 kids.
Absolutely.
So yeah, she sounds just like Brian.
Absolutely. No. She really is a sweetheart. Matter of fact, I had her to write an intro to the book and everything like that. And again, it's funny how genealogy and family history really can take so many turns for you. In doing this research, I thought that I was just helping somebody out. Maybe find a good. Maybe I thought maybe I'd get a good article out of it to write about or something like that. But lo and behold, we found all this history that literally rewrote the history of one of the oldest, not only one of the oldest American institutions, but arguably Black Freemasonry is the oldest African American institution, that we can show. So we literally rewrote a piece of American history and put it back. I didn't get to talk about today why some of this information was erased from the history as much as I wish I had, but we literally made history off of one newspaper article. So that's why I tell people, you find those little stories and things, don't just delete them, don't just put them somewhere off to the side. Those things do matter. Somebody wrote it down for a reason. So
yes, you're right. And the thing is that we have our families. I want to say this to everybody. All of our families have stories out there that are movie worthy. Mm-hmm. Everybody has at least one person in their family that's movie worthy, and you need to search them, and you need to search them out, not for the movie, but just for the history.
Right.
Because if we search these families out the way that we should, American history will be rewritten.
Absolutely.
And it'll be written in the way that it was supposed to have been written in the first place. So I want to thank you again, for really, for showing up and definitely showing out, because this was an awesome thing, and I can't wait. I do have the book, y'all. I do have it. I just got some things going on, but I have my book, and I am going to read it. And I'm, just very grateful and thankful for you showing up. Anything you want to say, Brian?
Thank you very much for sharing your Sunday with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, Brian, you want to talk about when we're having another show, or you want to just wait, or what?
That's going to be a special announcement, but just to let everyone know that we have 2 specials coming up in May. One is with a lady called Karen, who's written a book about the first 25 Africans to land in Virginia. So we're very excited to have her. And we're also going to be speaking with a Jewish genealogist who's going to give us tips and tricks about Jewish genealogy, which hopefully will be, give you transferable skills and give you new research strategy to research your own family.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, it is going on 5:30. Wow, James, I think you might have just caught up with our longest show, which was the show about the Sheila Project.
Mm-hmm. Oh man.
Yeah, I think so. I think you just kind of you might have either surpassed it or right at it. But
so now the book has won 2 awards.
Won 2 awards. That's right.
There we go.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for listening in. And you can always, if you missed the show, if you relate to the show, you can always go on Genealogy Adventures Facebook page and look at our videos, and it will pop up there. And it's also on our YouTube channel, Genealogy Adventures. So I'm Donya.
And not that you can see me, I'm Brian.
You guys have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.